So we understand you might want to leave government. But let's have an arrangement whereby, you still have an input into policy, and if it comes to a confidence vote, you back us. But that doesn't seem to have been finessed in any way at all. I mean, even if he has the support of Ash Regan next week in the confidence vote, I mean, is that sustainable, really?
Morning is our Friday regulars. Baroness Morgan, Nikki Morgan, the former Conservative Education Secretary, here in the studio. Hello.
Hello. Morning.
Good to see you. And Lord McConnell, Jack McConnell, the former Labour First Minister of Scotland. Hi, Jack.
Good morning. We were so delighted that you were both in the studio at the same time that we thought we'd come and join you.
Thank you so much.
It does make a change. This morning we're going to discuss the future of the current First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf. Plus, what are the implications of vetting academics for links to Chinese espionage? And how do politicians avoid digging a hole for themselves when trying to answer questions in the high-pressure environment on, say, for example, TV or radio? Well,
Last night.
You'll get a case study and model answers over the next 25 minutes or so.
Absolutely. Do join the conversation as you always do. I'm going to turn the heating down. It's a bit warm.
Right, okay.
It is a bit warm.
That's what happens when you
very
fill the
warm.
studio with people. It suddenly starts cooking.
Lots of
Don't
air.
blame us for your warmth in the studio.
We like it warm. It keeps us awake. But when more people come in the studio, it gets
Just because the SNP dropped the climate targets, they don't have to make the studio roasting.
Now listen to this for a case study on how to do this. Speaking of people who are feeling the heat, let's talk. Thank you. Let's talk about Humza Yousaf, First Minister of Scotland. His future as First Minister is hanging in the balance after he sacked the Scottish Greens from their role in government. There is now going to be a vote of confidence, or indeed a vote of no confidence, brought by the Scottish Conservatives. That will take place next week. The Times reports this morning he is considering his position. And of course, we're considering the position of Ash Regan, the only Alba Party MSP who was an SNP MSP. Humza Yousaf famously said she was no great loss when she defected, Jack.
Oops.
I wonder how he's feeling about that this morning.
So he probably regrets that even more than Chris Philp regrets his appearance on Question Time last night. In some ways this is a complicated situation, but it's also now pretty straightforward. I mean, I'm very surprised that they didn't think this through when they abandoned the climate targets last Thursday. I'm even more surprised that the Greens didn't immediately leave the government, although I think the two Green ministers were enjoying the ministerial cars and the ministerial salaries a little bit too much for their party members. And then when the Greens party membership made clear they were going to pull out, he's obviously reacted to that without thinking through the consequences, I think, and doing the numbers. I think you said this morning, somebody had said, was it war games by somebody who can't count?
That's right.
Yeah, it's in the Times today.
Yeah, exactly that. Do you think there would be a way? There could have been a way for Humza Yousaf to end the Butte House agreement that had the Greens in coalition amicably, where it wouldn't have resulted in this capitulation.
End, renegotiate, adjust. The SNP essentially had an agreement with the Tories between 2007 and 2011. Where Annabel Goldie and the Conservatives basically helped them pass their budget every year in return for a couple of crumbs from the table, sort of thing. And that was mainly because they were both against the Labour government and they wanted to create a few problems for Labour in Westminster. So there are other arrangements apart from coalition. Our coalition was a formal coalition with a very detailed agreement, but they could have said, look. We understand this is embarrassing for you, the climate target change. So we understand you might want to leave government. But let's have an arrangement whereby, you still have an input into policy, and if it comes to a confidence vote, you back us. But that doesn't seem to have been finessed in any way at all. I mean, even if he has the support of Ash Regan next week in the confidence vote, I mean, is that sustainable, really? It's not only her, because you and I took part in an event in Edinburgh last month when Fergus Ewing, the long-standing SNP MP, who's currently, I think, suspended from the party, who will probably vote for Humza Yousaf next week in the confidence vote. But he made clear his absolute opposition to almost everything they're doing in government.
And famously, Fergus Ewing, who I think may have served that suspension in the end because there was an appeals process, but he you're right, he was suspended, and he was suspended partly because he voted against Lorna Slater, one of the co-leaders of the Scottish Greens, because in a vote of no confidence, which resulted in the SNP then suspending him, and behold, here we are now, they've been fired from government.
So you've essentially got a whole series of individuals, and they're not the only two,
exactly,
who might then hold the First Minister to ransom on a fairly regular basis, and that is not a good position to be in.
Nikki, what do you make of it when you kind of look in on this and you see the breakdown in party discipline, the rebels that Jack's talking about, a vote of no confidence looming? I mean,
It's like the Conservative Party.
It's all feeling horribly
That was
familiar.
so obviously coming.
we didn't even have that written down.
See what a great tech we are. I was just reflecting on the fact that the great Tim Shipman has just published, hasn't he, the third, well, I think there's another volume to come in a trilogy, isn't there? But No Way Out. I think the lesson from all of this is the minute you are into vote of no confidence territory, even if you win it, that's it, your time in office is limited. And I'm staggered. I mean, so as a Westminster Conservative, I'm delighted to be watching this. I mean, I think in many ways, it's great sort of entertainment. As somebody said, for the people of Scotland, it's probably far less entertaining. They just want a competent government. But I think that probably Humza has to realise that actually his time is now limited. How is he going to extract himself, if not now or next week at some point? And it's just extraordinary, the lack of sort of tactical thinking. I mean, the whole point about politics is you have to war game, don't you, the steps ahead. If I do this, then they're likely to do that, and you try and work out. Sometimes you get it wrong, the second guessing, but you have to think 3 steps ahead all the time.
Just as we're talking, a couple of things on this exact story. So Sky News is reporting that Humza Yousaf has cancelled a speech he was due to give on independence today. Now, if I'm piecing 2 and 2 together here, the SNP have been issuing various papers on independence over the last number of months. You may not have noticed them because there's not been an awful lot of fanfare about them, if I'm honest. But the latest one was due to be published today, so it was probably around that, as I say, I'm putting 2 and 2 together. And I've just spotted this from Ash Regan in the last few minutes saying, I've written to Humza Yousaf this morning requesting a reset and a return to competent government where we prioritise independence and protect the dignity, safety and right of women and children. I remain open to any discussion where we progress the priorities of the people of Scotland. My door is open, she says in the letter, to discussing the progress of my proposed Scottish Parliament Powers Referendum Bill. The opportunity to write a new chapter for Scotland is in our hands, says Ash Regan.
Well, that sounds like the deal is on, doesn't it? I mean, I don't think there'll be any problem with giving her some words on independence that will allow her and Mr. Salmond to claim that they have had some influence. And my best guess is that, and I don't know this for certain, but my best guess is that Humza Yousaf is not as attached to the gender ideology policies as Nicola was, and that if he and without the Greens in government now, if he has to bend on that and adjust slightly in order to accommodate Ash Regan, then I think he will. So that sounds to me like there's a deal on.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But how do they bend on that, the gender point, when they've passed the Act? I mean, that we were discussing that, weren't we, a couple of weeks ago, about, the Act had come into force and the police were being overwhelmed in Scotland with complaints and everything else. And the trouble is they're so far down that road now.
So, yeah,
that's a really difficult one for them to compromise on, isn't it?
Although I think on the hate crime, on the Gender Act, the Gender Recognition Act,
Reform, yeah.
I think the UK
Sorry,
government
hate crime
act
stopped
intervention.
that, and then the
Yeah.
Hate Crime Act. My understanding is that Police Scotland still don't have any guidelines from the Scottish government on how to implement the act.
Right.
So it could be that she could get to extract some concessions on the
guidelines.
actual implementation of the
Yeah.
guideline. I mean, we know what the story is here. It will be words rather than actions probably,
Yeah.
and there will. I suspect that there will be the harsh reality of life will mean that Humza has to give them some words, and that put up with the fact that will see Mr. Salmond gloating.
As it puts him enormous leverage.
Here he goes again,
Yeah, well, he's been having a whale of a time in the last 24 hours, I think, as Mr. Salmond.
Unsurprisingly.
Yes, indeed. Just a very final thought from you on it, Nikki, because Jack mentioned Nicola Sturgeon, and actually the Butte House agreement with the Greens was a Nicola Sturgeon deal.
Yep.
And arguably, I think maybe it's fair to say this is the culmination of the complete destruction of Nicola Sturgeon's legacy now at this point as First Minister.
I think that's right, and I think it is extraordinary. I mean, sort of political people who appear to be absolutely in the ascendant, have the ground at their feet, and then actually it all falls apart, and not least because, of course, her husband, having just been charged with embezzlement of SNP funds, for example. Yes, I mean, it really is the last pulling apart. I'm sure she'll have a place in history, but I suspect that the SNP even more now, want to distance themselves from her as much as they can.
I think it's interesting to remember back to the leadership election last year,
Yeah.
because there were two main points of Kate Forbes' challenge to Humza Yousaf as the continuity candidate. One was to pull out of the agreement with the Greens, but the other one was she was very blunt about their performance in government. There was a key debate where she said, you know, the trains don't run on time, the schools are failing, the health service is a mess. You know, do you really want to be the continuity candidate? So I think what will be interesting is if he survives next week, you know, how do they improve the performance in government? Because I don't think the certain backbenchers, including Kate Forbes, will move on from the debate about the Greens in government to arguing about the actual quality of their performance as a government, and that will be the next big challenge for them.
Jack McConnell, Nicky Morgan, staying with us to discuss other big stories of the morning. We're going to be talking about threats to universities from states like China. We're going to be talking about the Supreme Court justices looking at whether Trump, has got more problems in the courts. He's got enough court cases going on at the moment. And also political interviews and when they go wrong. There's so much to talk about this. We could be here till 9:45. This is Times Radio Breakfast with Chloe Tilley and Callum MacDonald in association with Nationwide, a good way to bank.